As you can see from your conference agenda, we're about to start a session called Extracting Value for All, Maximising socio-economic benefits while maintaining and enhancing trust, with something of a focus on big data. So my name is Malcolm Crompton and I'm the Managing Director of a consulting company called Information Integrity Solutions, based in Australia, but consulting all over the world. And I have three colleagues here from Verizon and from Vodafone and the European Data Protection Supervisor, Peter Hustings. The bios for these people are in your folders and I will refer you to those for further detail. Let me shape the discussion for you briefly. Three remarks. Big data saves lives. By collecting all vital signs, for example, on newborn babies, it was possible to discover through big data analytics signs that showed when a baby, very newborn baby, was going to suffer infection 24 hours before anybody else could possibly work it out. And what was happening was, contrary to expectations, was that the body shut down about 24 hours before the visible infection came on, looking a bit like the body was shutting down for a fight. But nobody expected that result. Only big data from all vital signs allowed that to be discovered. Big data saves lives. You can read more about it in a wonderful book called Big Data by Ken Cukier from The Economist and Victor Meyer-Schonberger, who's currently at the Oxford Internet Institute. A second remark, big data makes mistakes. By definition, because big data is based on correlation, not certainties, it's based on correlation. Therefore, mistakes will be made. Let me give you a few examples, and I'm quoting from a newspaper article of only a week or two back. Quotes, customers at Woolworths supermarkets in Australia who drink lots of milk and eat lots of red meat are very, very good car insurance risks versus those who eat lots of pasta and rice and fill up their petrol at night and drink spirits. Sydney Morning Herald, 16th of September. There is a whole insurance industry developing, particularly in the USA, where premiums will depend upon your social network footprint. The advice from this conference, if you take nothing else away, is go and inspect your friends lists and unfriend some of the people who might be leading risky lives because their risk is being transferred into your risk and your insurance premiums. I kid you not. Big data makes mistakes. I read from an article that appeared very recently, I think in The Atlantic, and it's from a person who works at the New York City Mayor's office. I used to work for an energy efficiency company and we had people input their information about their energy use and we had a participation rate of about 30%. There was a huge self-selection bias. If you looked at Foursquare data for New York City and you looked at day-to-day operations of where Foursquare operates, you would assume everybody lives in Midtown. You would never see anything from the outer boroughs. As we talk about crowdsourcing information, at least from the city perspective, we have to be cautious about the huge silent majority of people who are not participating in these platforms and how we make sure that we use the data to serve their needs. Hence the third point, the big question. How do we maximise economic benefit while still maintaining or even enhancing trust? As we saw in the first session this morning, it was a wonderful session. We may well be approaching a trust bubble as identified by William Dutton from OII. For example, he said 61% believe that the internet puts privacy at risk, 67% feel that organisations ask for too much information, 63% are concerned about being monitored online. We saw that in China there was a new freedom, but it was due to two factors in terms of political engagement. The government is selective about where it applies its strictures and in fact is quite happy to watch local political debate, but steps in as soon as something threatens central government. And quite frankly, the other remark was, I won't get caught, which is what a lot of young people think. And that is a very fragile trust structure. So the structure of the session, we have until 1 o'clock sharp. I'm going to ask the speakers here to give us 10 minutes of opening remarks, and then we will do a quick Q&A from the floor. I'm expecting a considerable diversity of points of view, and I'm looking forward to a vibrant discussion. I'm simply going to proceed down the table. It's the democratic way of doing things because I just decided it. So I will ask Thomas Daly if he would give us his remarks first. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in London. I want to sort of step back and look at big data from sort of a foundational standpoint. At Verizon, as most of you probably know, we have a very significant network business and a significantly growing cloud business. We have wireline and wireless operations in the United States and a global network around the world. We are at a sort of foundational level the people that help make a lot of this big data work. And so when we look at big data, I look at it as partly as a network provider so that we enable the users of big data and the companies that provide the services that absorb and use the big data. We sort of make that happen. At another level, we're major data cloud data center provider. We provide cloud networks ourselves, and so we are developing our own applications and enabling others to work in that space. So I look at the rapid rise of big data and many of the issues that Malcolm has described, and so think back to how quickly we've gotten here. If you just look back a few years, we were very excited to have DSL speeds that were over a megabit. Next thing you know, we've got 100 and 300 megabit fiber services in the United States and super fast DSL services and fiber services in other parts of the world. We've now got LTE, 4G LTE services that are topping 10 or 15 megabits, so the wireless broadband is taking off in a big way. So all of this stuff has happened very quickly. And this isn't the issues that Malcolm is describing around how do we sort of manage the social infrastructure around this. It happens in other parts of the internet as well. And I'll give you a simple example. Most of you, or many of you may know that in the United States we've reached an agreement with the content owners to find a new way to fight piracy. I happen to be the chairman of the board of the entity that runs that. And so as we are looking at that issue, it's an issue of education of people, how to learn to behave online. And we don't want to be wagging our finger at folks, but there are certainly a lot of people who just don't know how to behave online, and so they need a little bit of help. What we've seen happen in that space, in the piracy space, is that the technology has evolved really fast and that the social values and mores haven't evolved along with it quickly enough. And I wonder whether in some ways, many of the things that you're describing, Malcolm, aren't also happening amongst the data users, the data consumers, the people whose data is being used. As we look back and try and sort out in our own lives how data is used, it's confusing. So at one level, I completely agree with the notion of transparency. We've got to get the regulation right. Trust is incredibly important for any kind of internet service, let alone these big data services. And I'll give you two simple examples that involve me personally. I had a situation happen about 3 weeks ago where all of a sudden on my phone, all of my address book on my phone was populated with pictures of people. And I had never put any of those pictures in. I had no idea where this came from. And I started thinking, okay, what social networks do I use? And I really don't, I'm actually a member of a couple, but I never use Facebook. I'm on Twitter, but I never use it. I do use LinkedIn. And I'm thinking, well, somewhere along the line, I must have pressed something, clicked on some link that told LinkedIn to go look at my address book on my phone and lay in or overlay all the pictures of people that were on my LinkedIn account that matched up with my phone. Now, the problem is I'm not certain it's them, and I also don't know how to get rid of it. So these little minor technical challenges sort of suggest that some of these notions around transparency and user control are critically important because you just use yourself as an example of how you might want to address that. So I'm not exactly sure what to do. At some point I'll have time to go figure it out. Another kind of data breach scenario that I've seen happen recently was with my college-age son. The week he went off to college, he got this letter, an email from the university saying, oops, we accidentally sent you a notice about your healthcare options, but we included your social security number on that. If you're concerned about it, we've also now automatically subscribed you to a year's worth of Privacy Watch, one of those online services that monitors your privacy to make sure that nobody's converting your identity. So these little examples happen, and they will continue to happen. And these are, the one with LinkedIn, I'm sure if I'd read things more carefully, maybe it wouldn't have been a problem. The example with my son was clearly a mistake. They didn't intend to do that. It just happened. Can we undo it? Well, probably not. But they've tried to do what they can to ameliorate the problem. But the point I want to make is that these issues are going to happen. It's going to happen as we evolve, as we learn how to use data, as we learn how to get the notices right, so that the situation that happened to me with, and I'll accuse LinkedIn of this, although it may not have been them, that we can avoid those better. So in the United States, one of the things that's happened recently is we had a mobile app multi-stakeholder process where with the NTIA, added an extra A there, various other stakeholders from companies and outside organizations sat down and said, all right, let's tackle one issue involving privacy and mobile applications, and it's going to be the issue of how to provide notice of the privacy notice, essentially, on an app. Interesting problem. Actually turned out to be, I think, quite a lively discussion over a period of months. Ultimately concluded with a agreement on a set of a code of conduct that they're now going to start trialing. And there are debates about how it should appear, how detailed it should be, what should it say, should it be phrased in the positive, should it be phrased in the negative, all valid questions. But that's a great way to tackle some of these technical challenges that pop up. And the reason I use this as an example is this multi-stakeholder approach is something that we've used a couple of times, I think successfully in the United States. And it's a way that I would commend to other economies as well, because I think it's something that's worth looking at in the type of environment that we have with rapidly changing technology, rapidly changing consumer uses, use cases, and user knowledge levels. It's important to try and get these things right. I think everyone can agree on that. Privacy is important. It's very important. Security is important. It's very important. Trust is also very important. So I'll leave it with that. It's a model that we think is something that works for us, and I'll turn the podium over to, I guess, Peter.
Good morning. I would like to make 3 points, basically. First, the focus of this session is on extracting value. But I think we also need to look at risks. In fact, some references were already made to risks. We can never really extract sufficient value if you do not include the risks. Are there any risks? Well, for one thing, over the summer, we've learned how vulnerable our online environment is, and this involved large-scale surveillance. As you know, it involved a number of internet service providers playing a role in this, and telcos, and it involved stories about intentional or unintentional backdoors in encryption. And we're sorting out the mess presently, ongoing. Apart from this big problem, are there risks? Well, the reference to big data suggests there are some risks about more and more data also raises more and more privacy risks, no doubt. And the reference to inherent mistakes, and all this based on probabilities, highlights another dimension of risks. So I would say extracting value is not possible if you do not invest in proper risk analysis and risk management, and in fact an entire privacy program as part of your strategic plans. It's nice to say this is important, but if you do not take this on board from the beginning in all your strategic developments, I think you miss out. That's one thing. That's my point one. So no values being extracted if you do not invest in privacy by design, and in accountability, and in demonstrating to whoever is interested in your trust, or reverse, that you are worth it. And what we've seen over the summer is enormous damage to trust. And you're all suffering. The second point I want to make is that in Europe, on the basis of standards, legal standards which have developed over a period of decades, and further developed in the framework of a directive which was implemented in national law, data protection rules, we are now in the middle of, and well on our way, in updating these frameworks in a set of rules which will apply directly across the European Union in all member states. It is, technically speaking, a regulation, but it is not a reg like the one you referred to in US law. It is actually across the European Union directly binding law. And it will provide for much more effective data protection in practice, meaning stronger rights for users, stronger responsibilities and accountabilities for organizations using data, collecting, processing, retaining, exchanging, and so forth and so on. In all sectors, public sector, private sector, it will involve stronger enforcement, quite robust enforcement. We refer to competition size fines and the like, and it has changed the environment of the discussion completely. Boardrooms ask themselves, is this going to be relevant for us? The answer is yes, and this is why you need to invest in privacy programs. The scope of these rules will be extended. It will apply to whoever is active on the European market, simply put, either from a European establishment or from elsewhere and offering services and goods on the European market. The discussion now is about the right calibration of these rules. There is an emphasis on risk-based approaches, but that means if there are risks, they need to be addressed, and you need to be accountable for the way you do this. It's very likely at this stage that this set of rules will be adopted this spring. Not for sure, but there is an enormous emphasis on delivering this. Third point, this doesn't happen in isolation. Right now, not only the EU, but also, for instance, the OECD was engaged in a rethink of its privacy frameworks. The OECD delivered the results over the summer. And if you see what is coming out, it's more soft law, it's more guidelines, but the message is exactly the same. More emphasis on practical privacy, more emphasis on delivering in practice, on accountability. And so this is a worldwide trend. That means that it makes sense to look at this in a global way and to anticipate that you will need to face stronger responsibilities in Europe, but there will be more. For instance, the German government has announced over the summer a strong emphasis on development of global standards, UN style. Now, not next summer to be delivered, but it's simply a trend. And there are ways to do this in an effective way, and I'd like to discuss that in Q&A. Thank you.
Peter, thank you. Over to you, Matthew.
Thank you very much. I think we're all agreed that big data is both a big opportunity and a big problem. And the question that we need to continue to turn over is how to ensure that we can benefit from the opportunity. Malcolm, you were talking about the opportunities in healthcare and so forth. There are many of those. We can benefit from the opportunity without exacerbating the problem. Just to give a couple of examples of things that we as a company are doing which illustrate the range of opportunity that's available. We have a program that helps retail stores to understand the nature of footfall coming in and out of their stores. This is something which you used to employ an agency, they would employ people, the people would irritate the people coming in and out of the stores by asking them questions and so forth. You can automate the whole thing now and cover a much wider area by doing it, because you can also see not only who's walking past your store, but who would be walking past your store if you had it somewhere else. There's been a great deal written about smart grid and the way in which smart grid technology can help energy consumption, can help the challenge of rising energy costs, rising energy demand, and the need to preserve the planet. And city planning, if you're a mobile company, as we predominantly are, city planning, there are a huge number of applications developing. We have one running in Istanbul at the moment, helping to redesign Istanbul's public transport network by understanding better what people actually do when they're traveling, at what time, where they're going from and to, and so forth. Just 3 small examples of things which are happening which illustrate the opportunity. Today there are a bit less than 3 billion users of the internet, a bit less than 7 billion people using a mobile phone on the planet. Our company in Kenya is connecting 17,000 new people to the internet every week. The rate of growth of all this kind of thing is very fast. The GSMA estimates that by 2020 there'll be 50 billion connected devices on the planet. That is going to generate a massive amount of data, far, far more than we have now. So I think the question how you use that data in ways that are safe, in ways that will command the trust of the people who are, by their activities, generating the data, is a very profound and fundamental one. And I think it's a very difficult one for regulation. Clearly there is, as Peter's just been explaining, there is a regulatory framework, there will be a new regulatory framework. But part of the difficulty for me is illustrated by the fact that the level of disclosure of an individual that happens through manipulating big data depends entirely on the answers that you get after you've asked the question. One of the features of big data when you start exploiting it is that you don't know what it's going to tell you. And some of what it tells you, as Malcolm was saying at the beginning, could be completely erroneous and misleading stuff. Sometimes asking the same question of a database at different times of the day will identify an individual very precisely at one time of the day, but you'll be one of 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people at another time of the day. Sometimes asking 4 or 5 different segments of information within a database will identify someone very precisely. Taking away one of those segments will leave the person completely anonymous within the data set that you have. So trying to define a regulatory framework around individual bits of data, I think is going to be enormously challenging for the future. What we're trying to do as a company, in our approach to this, is to look at the protection of data much more from the point of view of the individual. So you move from protecting data to protecting the individual in a world in which there is an awful lot of data moving around. And setting a standard for the type of consent that you need to have from an individual to be able to use their data, and very, very difficult definitional problem around what is their data. For example, we manage a network. The network has stresses in various places. It has faults in various places from time to time. You need to fix those. The way in which you monitor a network relies enormously on seeing what the people who are using the network are doing. And that's a completely natural thing for a telecommunications company to do, and the better we do it, the better service you as a user of the network get. If you associate that network management information with the account information that we have about these same individuals, you get a completely different picture. It's all data that we have within the company. How we use it makes the difference between something which is purely part of running a network efficiently and undoubtedly has a customer benefit to it, to something which is getting into an area where you could legitimately expect the customer to want to know what we are doing with the information that we hold and how we are looking after their interests. So I think this question of informed and continuing consent on the part of the individual is one that any company that's involved in a technology which amasses large amounts of data is going to have to work through in a way that really brings the customer with them and doesn't try and treat them as somehow an unintelligent and distant person. And that's a difficult thing to do in a very dynamic technology world with a relatively static set of regulations within which you're doing it. Great credit to those who are working on the new data protection regulation. It's a very important area. But the thing I think that you can more or less guarantee is that by the time it becomes law across all 28 member states of the European Union, something will be happening in technology which will challenge the way in which it operates, which will mean that it's either failing to protect people in the way that it should, or it's closing down an opportunity which it's clearly in the public interest to have open. That's just the nature of the beast. Final thought that has emerged a lot from the work that we've done with our customers and trying to understand their concerns, but also their desires about data. I think a lot of people in industries that have a large amount of data, whether it's telecommunications or internet services or banking or retail, see this as a revenue opportunity for their company, for their sector, and so forth. And undoubtedly, there are revenue opportunities there. My own view is that if you don't share those with the customer, you are never going to take the customer with you. If the customer doesn't see any benefit of the way in which you're using their data, they're not going to agree to it carrying on. If it's simply a revenue generator for the service provider, it's not going to work. So working out how you create new opportunities, enable new services, enable new kinds of things to happen, but then share the benefits of them with the people who are generating the data that create them, I think is the big challenge for the future. Thank you very much.